Welcome everyone. Thank you, Helen, for being with us today. So Helen Cook represents Client Relations for Educational Testing Service, the largest not-for-profit research and measurement company globally. She's a consultant and educator with over 30 years experience. I mean, she has had a very distinguished career, and Helen has held senior management positions in international higher education in Australia, including as Executive Director QUT International, and has also been awarded a life membership of IEAA in recognition of her contribution to international education. So thank you, Helen, for being with us and telling us how the TOEFL can help students get into Australia and New Zealand. So over to you, Helen, and I should leave you here.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm going to take you through some information about the TOEFL test and its acceptance in Australia and New Zealand. I'm also hopefully going to answer your questions. The chat session will be open all of the time, and my colleague Siddharth will be responding to your queries. But we also will have some time at the end to go into any of those questions. So I'm not sure how much you know about the TOEFL test, so I want to talk to you a little bit about the test itself, in case you're not aware of it. I mean, the thing to remember with the TOEFL test that it's accepted by 100% of Australian and New Zealand universities. Next slide, please, thanks. And over 35 million people have taken the TOEFL test. And of course, lots of other Indian students have already used the TOEFL test to provide their admission test to Australia and New Zealand. Let's go to the next slide and a few fast facts about the TOEFL test. So it's a 4 skills test. As usual, it tests listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And it's a test that can be used for both admission and also for other things like post-study work visas, permanent residence, applications for professional registration, say to become an engineer or a doctor. And it's also used for scholarships. In terms of the test itself, next slide, please, Siddharth. It's a 3-hour test. So you do it all in one sitting. You don't have to come back later for a speaking test. You get your scores in 6 days. And in fact, with your speaking, with your listening and your reading, you'll get the scores immediately before you leave the test center. One of the things I'll talk to you about in relation to the TOEFL test is our scoring, because we believe it's the most objective of all the English language test scoring methods. We use, for speaking and writing, we use both human scorers and also automated scoring beside those human scorers. In terms of the test cost, it's $180 US. And of course, discount vouchers and other forms of payment can be accepted. Now, we want you to feel comfortable about and feel that you understand the test, no surprises, that you are able to find out all the information you need. So if we look at this slide, the TOEFL Go Anywhere slide, TOEFLGoAnywhere.org is the very best site for you to go to. There's lots of prep materials, lots of information, tips and tricks, and you'll find everything that you need to help you to prepare for a test and to register for the test. We also offer full free practice tests. If you register for the test, the very next email you'll get will also offer you a full free practice test. Next slide, please. Siddharth. So this practice test gives you all 4 sections. You can work through with the listening and the reading and see the answers, and you can look at sample answers for the speaking and the writing. So there's lots and lots of material available to you. Next slide, please. There's also, from our colleague Michael at ETS in Princeton, there's also something called the Insider's Guide to the TOEFL test. And it takes you through all the details, everything you need to know about questions, about the scoring criteria, and tips about how to improve your English. So what kinds of questions does the TOEFL test actually cover? What sorts of things do you need to do when you get into the actual test room? Well, as I said, there are 4 sections. There's the reading section, and this, you may have about 3 passages to read, and you have about 9 or 10 questions. The questions, you get a point for each question, except the last one where you might get 2 points because it asks you to do more. And all of the TOEFL topics will be either some form of discipline focus. That might be a science like biology, or it might be a history topic or a general topic. But you don't need any extra information. You don't need to have studied these topics. If there's any information you need, it will be in the material you're provided. What we want you to do in the reading section is show that you understood the main ideas, and maybe it might ask you, for example, the meaning of a word or a summary of this section. You can change your answers, you can go back and review your answers, and all the time there's a clock on the screen that's telling you how much time you have to do all of this. And the reading section gives you quite a lot of time to go through the questions. And you can always, if you don't know, always put an answer in, because another fact about the TOEFL test is you don't get marks for wrong scores against you for wrong answers. So if you think it's your best guess, mark that answer because it may be right. Moving on to the listening section. The listening sections a test to try to check that you understand conversations and lectures in English. So some of the questions will be about conversations. So you might see on your screen 2 students talking, or a student and a lecturer talking, and it might be about some general campus situation. Say you want to hand an essay in late, or there's a change to the schedule, whatever. And so you'll be asked perhaps to see that you understand what's happening with those questions. There might also be some short presentations. Again, you can take notes, but and then respond to the questions about what you've heard. So nothing too challenging here. In terms of the speaking test, the speaking test is an interesting one. It's a very important one for you. You get preparation time for all of the questions. So once again, you'll have the clock there, and it'll help you to know how much time you've got from what you're doing. So there are 4 speaking items. The first speaking item is about a familiar topic, so something that you know something about and can talk about. The second and third questions ask you to maybe read something or listen to something and then answer a question. The fourth question might ask you, for example, to summarize the main points of something you've just heard. So all of these questions, you can take notes while if you're listening or reading something. And once again, what you respond it's a holistic mark. It's talking about how you communicated. It's not marking your errors. So you should always try and do your best response. In the writing section, there are only 2 questions. In the first question, which is called the integrated task, you might listen to a short presentation, read something as well, and they'll both be about the same topic. And then you'll have to answer some questions. And typically this takes, you're given 20 minutes to actually do the writing. And remember, you're doing it on a keyboard. The second question is what we call an independent task. And that's where you might give your opinion about something, and it'll be about the way you've developed your ideas. I'll look at the language that you've used, how you organized those points. And as I said to you, you'll have a different person mark each item, and it'll also be marked by an automated speaking tool or automated writing tool. So we are trying to give you the most consistent and objective scores. And we think that's very important because you want a fair representation of what you've been able to achieve. A little bit more on the next slide about scoring. The score scale is out of a total score of 120. So each of the skill scores, listening, speaking, reading, writing, are out of 30, and they're added. So there's no averaging of scores. It's a simple addition of the scores you've achieved. So the reading and the listening are marked by the computer, and you'll see that mark before you leave the test room. Whereas the speaking and the writing are all marked by a combination of many different human scorers plus an automated scoring tool, which is a double check on the human scorers. So remember, you don't lose marks for incorrect answers. So it's always better to try to put something down, or if it's a short question, to get your best response. In terms of your results on the next slide, you'll get an email from ETS 6 days after you've done the test. It'll ask you to go to your online account and to view your scores. And scores are valid for 2 years. So how can you use these scores? Next slide, please, Sita. Let's look at what's happening in Australia first. Next slide. So the Australian government accepts TOEFL scores done in a TOEFL test centre not only for student visas, but also, as I mentioned, for post-study work visas, for skill migration, permanent residence, and so forth. And as you probably already heard today, if you started your course now, that online course that you started could have the time that you've studied at home recognised for your post-study work visa. Now let's talk a bit about test centres and where you can do a test. About 70% of the test centres in India are currently open. And if you look in Mumbai or Pune or Ahmedabad on the TOEFL Go Anywhere site, you'll find that there's some test centres already open in August, and more of them are open in September. Testing is usually on Friday, Saturday or Sunday, and occasionally it's also on a Wednesday. So you can always look there to see if there's a test centre that's available to you. But I'll talk later about our home edition because that's another choice that you will have. If you do apply for a student visa, and you do use the TOEFL test, there are some minimum scores that you must meet to meet the visa requirements. But as you will see, these minimum scores are not very high. So if you're applying to Australia, I'm sure you'll do much, much better than the minimum scores you can see on your screen. And of course, you have to meet the English requirements for your university. So their scores are also much higher than the scores that are on the screen. So what kind of scores do you need to get entry to a university in Australia? Next slide, please, Siddharth. On the screen, there are some samples of the kinds of scores that you would require to enter an Australian university with the TOEFL test. So a very common score is around 79 or 80, but some universities have lower scores and some have higher. So that's 80 out of a total of 120. For some postgraduate courses and some specialist courses, you will need a higher score, and it'll probably be, say, 94 plus. That's out of 120. So, for example, if you are interested in nursing, that kind of course would have a higher English requirement. So it very much depends on the university and on the course and on the level of the course. So 100% of Australian universities accept TOEFL scores, and 100% of them get TOEFL scores from students around the world. So which universities get most of the scores? Well, as it happens, quite a lot of scores go to what we call the Group of 8 universities. So this is Sydney, Melbourne, Monash, and so forth. And we know that they are getting excellent candidates when they get students with TOEFL scores. A bit longer list for you, just to give you an idea of institutions that are getting TOEFL scores. If you look at the screen, the ones at the top are in Melbourne, so Monash, University of Melbourne, RMIT, Deakin, La Trobe as some examples. If you look at Sydney, University of Sydney, University of Technology Sydney, Macquarie, and in Brisbane, University of Queensland. Of course, these are not the only institutions that get TOEFL scores, but they are the ones that are more popular with Indian students who tend to use TOEFL scores to come to Australia. Also, some students go through the study group college, and they get quite a lot of TOEFL scores as well. Other universities, to give you some idea of the diversity, we have testimonials here from the University of Tasmania and James Cook University in North Queensland. So TOEFL scores are very welcome in Australia, and you don't need to worry if you've got a TOEFL score, it will be accepted by the institution you want to go to. Let's turn now to New Zealand. So with 100% of New Zealand universities accept TOEFL scores, and on the screen you've got some examples of the kinds of scores that are required. And once again, all universities get TOEFL scores. The largest number of TOEFL scores in New Zealand from India go to the University of Auckland, but all universities get TOEFL scores. In terms of things like visas for New Zealand, the New Zealand Immigration Authority not only accepts TOEFL scores for meeting English language requirements for all institutions, but you can also use a TOEFL score for permanent residence applications in New Zealand. So as you can see, in New Zealand as well, you can use TOEFL scores to gain admission, and your scores will be welcomed. I'd like to turn now to something that's a bit newer and something you might not be so familiar with. And that is the TOEFL Home Edition. I know some of you will be in areas where maybe you can't go to a test centre, or you don't feel that it's a good idea to go to a test centre. So we have the perfect solution for you. So TOEFL is the only test company that gives you a choice. You can go to the TOEFL test centre, or you can take your test at home. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this because thousands of Indian students have already taken their TOEFL test at home. So if you're going to take the TOEFL test at home, it is really important that you look very carefully at what is going to be expected of you. So what's the same? Well, it's the same test. It's the same test experience. So if you do a practice test for TOEFL, remember I told you about the free practice test. If you do the practice test, the experience of the online test environment is exactly the same as the practice test, as the test centre test. It's exactly the same. It's the same price. You can use discount vouchers as well for the TOEFL Home Edition. It's the same scoring, the same people score the test, and the score reports are the same. So there are some differences. You can register for a test 24 hours a day, and the testing for TOEFL is from Sunday to Wednesday. So on any of those 4 days, you can register at a wide variety of times that suit you. I've mentioned to you that you can take it at home, but you can also take it in other environments as long as you're the only person in the room. So, for example, if your agent had a spare meeting room and you were able to go there, you could do your test in that environment. What you need is somewhere that no one else is going to come in to the test environment, into the test room, while you're taking your test. So there are some environmental requirements. Website, the Special Home Edition website, it takes you very carefully through all the things you need to know. So what it asks you to do is to actually check that you can download the software on your computer that you're going to test on. It tells you about all the environmental requirements, so you know what to expect, you know what not to bring into the room. The test is conducted over the same period of time. You do get a break, a 10-minute break, as you do in a test centre, between the second and third parts of the test. So much of it is the same. The whole test experience is videotaped, so you need to be aware of that. So have a photo of you in the clothes that you're on will be part of your test report. And so we are careful about the environment. So what is different? What is different if we look at the security requirements? What is different on the next slide is that you will have a live proctor, someone who is there, someone who lets you enter the test environment, who checks your testing space is appropriate. For example, you have to have a clear desk. You can't have all your papers around you. I've done this test and I actually did it on my dining room table so that I didn't have to clean up my desk. So the proctor will guide you. So the proctor checks your environment, checks your ID, and also goes through that process again after the break. and they're monitoring your progress all the time that you're doing the test. So they can see you, but you can't see them. And so if you've got a problem or a question, they can help you. So, you know, we're not trying to catch anybody out, but we do want to be sure that your test result is secure. Another way we do that is through some very clever AI tools. The company who does the proctoring is a company called ProctorU. They've been doing this work for over 10 years, and they developed some interesting biometrics and other AI tools that they use to ensure that you're not getting any help from anywhere else. And so we also use facial recognition technology between your test day photo and the person who's in front of the screen. And as I said, we also videotape built in both through the proctor and through the AI tools to ensure that, you know, that you can be confident that everybody who's doing the test this way is getting a fair result. For the TOEFL Home Edition, we are waiting for approval from the Department of Home Affairs. They should come back to us very shortly in terms of approval of this version. So all universities in New Zealand accept the TOEFL Home Edition. Pretty much all universities in Australia accept the TOEFL Home Edition as well. So you will find that you can do your test at home and it will be accepted by the universities that you wish to enter. So lastly, just in summary, 100% of Australian universities accept TOEFL scores, 100% of New Zealand universities accept TOEFL scores. We would like to offer you a discounted test voucher and also a short sample test which has been created especially for this event today. So I would very much recommend that you go to see my colleague Siddharth at the ETS TOEFL booth, and he'll be able to talk to you further about the discounted test voucher and register you for the short sample test, so you get a taster of what the test is like. I'm now going to hand back to Siddharth, and we can follow up if there are any questions that Siddharth has not been able to answer. Siddharth, do we have any questions?
Let us just look at it. I think this one question is coming in. Is GRE required for a master's in Australia and New Zealand along with TOEFL? I certainly don't believe, Ronak, that's the case, since GRE, you know, is an examination predominantly taken by US-based universities. They are the ones who require that score. So it's just the TOEFL score that he needs to look at.
Okay, in terms of the GRE test, there are a couple of programs in the University of Melbourne's Business School that have a GRE requirement, but they are the only ones that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So by and large, in Australia and New Zealand, you don't use a GRE test, but the university has some business courses where you can use a GRE test.
Oh, great. Thanks for that input, Helen. I don't see any other particular questions which are coming in, but if there are questions that you have, students, you know, joined in for the session, please post them on the chat box or meet us at the expo where we are at with ETS TOEFL. So looks good, Helen. I think we are at 4 in the evening and we are through with our session time. I don't see more questions coming in But thanks for joining us and being a part of the presentation.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Good
Goodbye,
luck.
everyone. See you around.